Welcome. This is my talk, Work in Progress, Debugging Depression. My name is Ellen. My Twitter handle is Ellen, or L is for Ellen, so feel free to tweet me there at any time. Let's talk about my goals for the session today, what I want everybody to get out of this. First and foremost is to help destigmatize mental health issues in tech. But also to, and more importantly for me right now, is to advocate for a paradigm shift. And what I mean by that, what I want that to look like, is for us to start paying attention to the whole person and not just their work. To have the courage to care, because that leads to the courage to connect. We have way too many forces that drive us to isolation, and with some effort we can overcome them. And this would lead to improving our lives, relationships, creativity, and our work. Today I'd like to share with you my experience with that process. So let's start. Well, first, before we start, I do want to say I'm not a mental health professional. I don't claim to be. So take this for what it is. It's just me sharing my experience with you. Let's start at the beginning. Okay, not that far back. That's a bit too far back. Let's start at the beginning of my mental health journey, which for me was summer of 2016, and so about a little over 2 years ago. And during this time, I was going through a huge career change. I had previously been a high school teacher, and I was becoming a developer. I entered into an apprenticeship program and was learning to develop for the first time. And it was during this program that I started to realize, one, just how difficult that is, of course, but it was the first time I really struggled with anything. I was the kind of student that during high school, I got straight A's. I didn't have to study. I didn't have to work very hard. Everything was just kind of easy and done, right? This is the first time that I really had to sit down and study and become a real student. As I'm sure most of you know, being a developer is not easy, and there's a lot to learn, right? So it wasn't like maybe what the problem was in high school where I didn't really care. I wanted to learn this. It wasn't that I wasn't interested. I also needed to. I was changing my career, right? My livelihood depended on this. But I couldn't focus. So no matter how much I wanted to, I wasn't able to sit down and read or watch the videos or do that deep dive, the digging into things to understand the concepts that I needed to do. I couldn't focus. And this started to spill outside of work as well. I wasn't able to focus long enough to hold a conversation. I would be talking to my friends and trail off mid-sentence. Like, I couldn't finish a thought. And thankfully, my friends started to kind of point that out to me. You know, we'd be talking, I'd be like, yeah, so, yesterday we, and they're like, yeah, yesterday you what? And I was like, what? I have no idea. What are you talking about? Just totally spaced out, right? And when they saw that this was continuing on, this wasn't just, oh, it was like a bad day or whatever it was, they brought it up to me. They voiced their concerns. They said, hey, like, you're kind of not how you used to be, you know? You're not, I don't know, I'm not super social anyways, but they're not, you're not carrying a conversation, like, you can't focus. And I was like, oh, man, I thought it was all in my head. Like, I knew I was struggling with this, but the fact that other people were noticing it, that kind of hit home. I was like, oh, okay, so it really is a problem. I'm not just imagining it. So they encouraged me to go see a doctor, which I did, and talk to my doctor a bit about what was going on. And he's like, well, yeah, okay, huge life changes. You're changing your career. You're trying to learn a completely new skill set. That sounds incredibly stressful. Because I was, at the time, very worried about anxiety. And yeah, worrying about anxiety does not help your anxiety, by the way. So talking to my doctor, though, he's like, I want to test you for attention deficit disorder. Because especially as a female that goes undiagnosed, often until much later in life, if it's ever diagnosed. In women, it tends to present itself a little differently. You're not like the boy that can't sit down and is running everywhere. A lot of times it just comes out as disinterest. So it doesn't get caught as early. It's not what everybody's looking for. And so I was like, okay, sure. You know, like I was a straight A kid, but I also didn't have to put much work in to do that. So I'll do your little survey and we'll figure it out. Turns out I scored off the charts. It's like not just a little bit of ADHD, it's like, is at like 100% for both ADD and ADHD. I was like, oh. And the interesting thing is ADHD and anxiety, they're kind of like these best bros that egg each other on in the worst possible way. They just kind of try to one-up each other all the time. So they feed on each other. And so the more anxious you get, the worse your ADHD gets. And the worse your ADHD gets, the more anxious you get. And they just kind of amp each other up. So thankfully, learning this about myself and working with my doctor, he put me on medication. And it's like got that under control. I was able to actually finish the apprenticeship successfully. I'm an iOS developer still today, which is fantastic. And I've got it. It's not solved. You know, those problems don't go away, but it's very manageable now, which is great. So I want to take a step back and talk about how to help others. And first and foremost, the important thing is to be present. And what I mean by that is to actually pay attention to those around you and check in on them. And it doesn't take much, right? But it's not the conversation that I'm sure we've all had at the water cooler, in the kitchen, wherever, where you're like, hey, how's it going? And good, you, okay, great. And you go on, and sometimes you even have like these default greetings that get mixed up in the wrong way. So if they ask you a new question, you're like, great. And they're like, that's not what I asked. Like, they're like, how's the weather today? And you're like, oh, I had a fantastic weekend. And you're like, but that's not it at all. So be present in those moments when you're talking to people. Give that part of yourself, right? And easy check-ins. If you notice somebody's acting differently, you notice or maybe you know through Facebook or whatever that something's happened, grab a coffee, check in with those people. Another big thing is don't wait until you're healthy enough to help. I think it's easy to get caught up in this trap of knowing like, oh man, I'm suffering, I'm struggling, and it's hard enough to just take care of myself, let alone helping other people. But you just being there, like that's the best part. You being present and being there for people, that's enough to help. You are not trying to fix them. You are not trying to change everything in their life. You just need to be there, right? And don't get me wrong, there are going to be times probably in your life, I know there's points where you can get to where you aren't going to be able to help other people, where you really do need to focus on yourself. But if you can show up and be present, if you're able to do that, that's enough to be helpful. Things you should pay attention to is a lot of people think about depression, or like the way the media portrays it is like somebody sobbing at their desk at work, or just being really sad all the time, those kind of things. And well, it can look like that. The biggest indicator is change in a person. Change in their behavior, change in their moods. And if you're present enough to pay attention to those around you, you'll be able to notice these changes. So it doesn't always look like crying. Depression can come out in different ways in a lot of different people. It could be anger. It could be they're snapping back at you at meetings. They're short. They're showing up late to things. Maybe they're usually really well-dressed and they're not really so well-dressed. You might know somebody wearing like the same clothes 4 days in a row when usually they have very fancy outfits on, or whatever it is. It's about the change. So you also might know somebody that wears the same outfit 4 days, like they only have a black t-shirt and jeans and they have like 10 of them in their closet. So you can't just sit here and say, this is what it looks like. It looks different in everybody. It's more about the change in behavior. Another thing to look out for is negative self-talk. I know I'm guilty of this all the time, like right now. So even being self-deprecating enough to say like, oh yeah, I do this all the time because I'm really bad about it, right? But one thing to kind of watch out for, because we all sort of fall into this trap, is to ask yourself when you hear your coworkers or your friends talking, like, would you be okay with them talking to a child like that? Would you be okay with them talking to like this young developing mind in the way they're talking to themselves? And if not, that's a good red flag to watch out for. Because we really shouldn't be talking about ourselves in some sort of mean, disparaging way any more than we should talk to a child like that. So if it's easy for you to think in your head like, well, I would never say that to a kid, you know, that's not nice, then why would you say it to yourself? It's important to also recognize that just as depression looks different on different people, so does happiness. So all my close friends know that if I ever showed up super bubbly and very excited all the time, out of nowhere, they would be really concerned because that's not me, right? Like, my happiness looks different. And it's the same for everybody. We all kind of look different. So the important thing here is that you're not trying to fix them. You're just trying to help them gain whatever happiness is to them. And encourage them to get help. And that doesn't mean solving their problems, like I said. It could be as easy as saying, hey, yeah, if you're gonna, like, you should check into a doctor. You should talk to your doctor about this. Have you talked to anybody about this? In my case, I'll often share that I've gotten help. Like, oh, what you're going through, that seems really tough. You know, I'm so glad I would talk to my therapist about that. Do you have somebody you could talk to? And then if not, and if they're interested, like, yeah, if you ever need help, I'll make your appointments for you. I'll make the phone call. I can get you a phone number. What's 5 minutes on Google for me, right? But for them, if they're really struggling, that could be it. I know as a true millennial, I do not like making phone calls. So that act of like making a phone call when I'm not in a good headspace, that's enough to stop me from doing anything, right? Like, and it could be talking to people I actually enjoy talking to, and I won't do it for months. So if I knew it would help my friend, though, I'd say, like, yeah, you want me to call the doctor I will call and make your appointment, no problem. I'll get everything I can possibly taken care of for you. Or heck, I like driving. You need a ride? I'll happily pick you up. Make sure you get to work on time. That's one thing I do. I'll check in with my friend. Hey, you want to ride into work today? Just make sure she's doing okay. So you offer help in the way that you're capable of. You're not being asked to be a superhero. You're not being asked to completely change these people's lives. But these small acts can actually change people's lives. So being helpful doesn't have to be a huge, huge thing. So back to my story. So I know you're captivated. So about a year after the apprenticeship finished up, so in fall 2017, which I'm from the States, so that's like September. Oh, sorry, September. Sorry, I talk with my hands. So it's interesting because it turns out what I just told you was just the beginning of the story. So it seems like, okay, great, yep, got on meds, got my life in order, got a new career, I was successful, work was going great at this point, so everything on paper was lining up. Fantastic, no problems. An interesting thing happens when you sort out one area of your life that had kind of been maybe in turmoil, you kind of gain bandwidth to then find other issues in your life, and they kind of bubble up for you. And even though, from the outside looking in, everything was kind of sorted for me, I realized I started having thoughts of self-harm. So like every day driving into work, I was thinking about it, and I'm like, well, this isn't good, but okay. And then realized the thoughts weren't going away. And then I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, if I was actually going to self-harm, I can't do it because somebody would notice, right? Like, I don't want to invite those conversations. So, okay, well, how do I do it and do it in a way that people won't notice? How can I get away with harming myself and hiding it? And it was when I kind of started going down that path that I realized, and coming up with, I hate to say solutions, but ways to do this, that I started to realize I had actually a history of self-harm. That in high school I had self-harmed quite a bit and never even recognized it as such. So considering myself a relatively educated person as far as mental health goes, this was sort of like a shocking revelation to myself. And I also knowing my own history, about like the patterns that I was about to fall into. I kind of recognized that happening. And with this realization, that's when I started to think, okay, you know, I don't want to go down this path. I don't want to go deep into depression. I have, like I said, things on paper were going great. Like, I don't want to screw it up, and I don't want to go through a really tough time again. So I recognized I needed to get help. Okay? Thinking about seeing a therapist. So I talked to some friends who thankfully had discussed their experiences in therapy with me. And I said, yeah, I'm thinking about seeing a therapist. And they're like, okay, yeah, that's great, you know. And they made those offers that I just talked about. They said, if you need help making an appointment, I can make the appointment for you. If you need this, you know, whatever it is, I can give you rides. They stepped up in those very simple ways. And that was enough to kind of keep me going and knowing I had that to fall back on. So I personally got lucky. One night when I couldn't sleep, filled out an online form to contact a therapist. She emailed me back. I feel like that in and of itself is luck. When do we actually fill online forms out and somebody gets right back to you? And she's been a great fit for me. I actually still see her. But something I was aware of at the time is we have a mental health Slack channel at work, and people are very open about talking about their experiences with therapy. And that made me aware that finding a good fit is actually very difficult. So I knew that I was lucky to hit it off with this therapist and know that she was like a good fit for me. But I also knew that if she wasn't, that it was okay to leave, that it was okay to keep trying new therapists until I found somebody that worked for me. And I wouldn't have known that without my coworkers being open about their experiences and knowing that they went through that. And I knew that, luckily for me, that my friends had already offered to make those phone calls to help me find people, to make suggestions on who to call, and that if I didn't hit it off with my therapist, if it didn't work out, I could always lean on them for those things, which was great. So stepping back a moment here, I want to talk about how to help yourself. So I'm very much motivated by other people. So the easy slide for me was, how do you help other people? Great. But how do you actually help yourself? And it starts with valuing yourself and knowing that you deserve happiness, whatever that looks like for you, that you deserve better. And that's, depending on where you are emotionally, that can seem like worlds away. But one step to getting there is avoiding that self-deprecation and that negative self-talk yourself, which is way easier said than done, because I fall into the trap of it all the time. But the first step is starting to recognize it. So noticing when you're doing it, calling it out, and fixing it. And you can start to go, oh, yesterday I said those things about myself or whatever, and they're not true. If you can start there, that's good. If you can start to recognize as it happens and start to fix it, then hopefully you curb the habit of actually doing negative self-talk. I still do it all the time, but it starts with that recognition, and then you can curb the behavior. Because, I mean, I've got decades of experience of putting myself down. So you got to realize that changing that behavior is not going to happen overnight. You know, it's like any habit. And you're fighting a habit that you've had probably for a long time, for many years. One sort of easy phrase that I find helpful in this arena is to say that, like, I fucked up. I'm not a fuck up. So, like, excuse my language, but so it's okay to mess up. It's okay to make a mistake, but I am not a mistake, right? Like, okay, I did something wrong, but that doesn't make me an idiot. And having that in your head can really help you reframe the situation. And you're still admitting that you made a mistake, which is fine. We all make mistakes. But that is not who you are, right? Another thing, if you notice you're not feeling great, you start to feel down, you feel like you're going down like some sort of a spiral, check in on your own basic needs. It seems pretty obvious, but if you're not eating well, getting enough water, getting enough sleep, and getting exercise, then there's no way you're going to be mentally stable. And they all kind of interact with each other. So if you have trouble sleeping, which is super common if you have mental health issues, try to work on the other things, the things that you can control, because you can't will yourself to sleep, right? So making sure you're eating right. And I'm not up here advocating some perfect diet. Just if you're eating fried food every day, maybe have like a salad, like you don't have to switch everything, but just get some vegetables in your diet or whatever it is. Make sure you're getting enough water. And exercise is huge. It doesn't have to be hitting the gym. Go for a walk if the weather's good enough. And getting, especially exercise, water and food down, then sleep should come. Exercise will really help you sleep, which these are all kind of fairly obvious things, but it's just something to kind of stop and go, okay, things haven't been feeling right for me. I feel like I'm in a rut. Check those things first. Just be like, am I getting them? Another thing, avoid alcohol and drugs. I tell you that, I was on the boat cruise last night having all the beers I could. So I'm not saying give it all up. I'm saying find out what works for you. I personally am trying to cut back on my drinking. I'm giving myself some leeway right now because I'm like, I'm on vacation and all the beers are new. But part of my motivation for cutting back on drinking was because I realized I was drinking for the wrong reasons. So I really like beer. I often travel to find and try new beers. But when I'm drinking a bottle of wine a night just to not be alone with my emotions, that is not the same as trying new beers. So you got to figure out what works for you and understand what reasons you're doing those things for. So are you doing them purely to avoid feeling your emotions, to feel something different? Because for me, it ended up being just like those thoughts of self-harm. It's sort of a form for that. So it's like, well, I don't want to feel this pain. I'll feel pain in a different way. I don't want to feel this, so I'll drink a bottle of wine. Ask for help. And I will tell you that is one of the most difficult things to do. I know. I broke my leg this summer, and that was kind of a humbling experience because there was a lot of things I just could not do. I also know from experience that it's much easier to ask for help if it's been offered. And that's why it's become more important for me to make sure that I can offer help to others. One of the things that stops me from asking for help is feeling like I'm being a burden. And what is important to recognize is it's not on you to make sure it's not solely on you to make sure you're not a burden on somebody else, right? They are the judge of that. You can't tell that. So you need to trust those people that they will protect their boundaries, that they will make sure that, they'll only take on what they can. And along with that comes dealing with when they say no. So I've asked for help, and I've had people tell me no, they can't do it. And that was crushing, because it was really vulnerable for me to go out, put myself out there and ask for help, and then for them to say no. That was absolutely crushing. But what helped work through that in my brain was to stop and think, okay, they can't do it for some reason, right? And the easy jump for in my head is to go, but I would do anything for them. Okay, if they asked me for something and I couldn't do it, and I had to say no, does that mean I don't like them? Does that mean that our bond isn't as strong? No, absolutely not. I would hate saying no, but if I couldn't do it, I couldn't do it, but it doesn't mean I like them any less. It doesn't mean they're any less important to me. And the tough twist is turning that around and recognizing that the same is true for them, right? That being said, it still sucks to hear no, but it's totally worth asking for help. A key to all this is having self-awareness enough to know that you need help, to know that you're worth more, that you deserve more, and to catch yourself talking negatively about yourself. And how do you build this self-awareness? It's all great if you have it, but a lot of us don't. A couple simple ways are to start journaling, which enables self-reflection. A big thing for me is like seeing an empty piece of paper or like a brand new notebook, which is really pretty, and I really hate putting anything in there that doesn't seem worthy to go in there. So it's a hurdle to get over that, but I can sometimes just go like, okay, whatever. This will be my like word vomit notebook, and then I'll have a very nice journal. So maybe I get a cheap journal. That's my, my journaling journal, right? Whatever you need to do to trick yourself into putting pen to paper, it's kind of worth it. And just knowing it doesn't have to be perfect. Also practicing mindfulness and meditation, if you're into that. But I like putting mindfulness here just because there's such a low barrier to entry. There are lots of apps and all that out there to help you do it, lots of resources online. But if you, just on the base level, if you take time to sit alone with your thoughts and sort of try to clear your head. Now I said try, doesn't mean you totally clear your head. If you take 5 minutes and you just start to see like, okay, I'm gonna take 5 minutes and not think about anything. Well, inevitably thoughts will come up, right? All you have to do is acknowledge them and say, I'm not thinking about that right now. Like, okay, like this came up, I'm gonna push it over here and go back to thinking about nothing. So it helped me to understand that I didn't have to like clear my mind completely. That made it much easier to start doing this. And as far as self-awareness goes, it's interesting to see what thoughts keep coming up. What are those pervasive thoughts? And when you start, maybe you get 2 seconds, if you're lucky, in between all those thoughts. But as you start to build on that, you can kind of stretch that period out. Another way to build self-awareness is to ask. Ask friends, ask coworkers, get feedback from people. And that can come from asking your coworkers like, hey, what do I bring to the team? What are my strongest attributes? It doesn't have to be constructive criticism. You can ask for positive things. If you're just trying to build an awareness of who you are, then you can go out and kind of give these softball questions. And it's just helpful to see how others see you. And then you can see if that matches up. Does that feel right? Did they call me loyal? Did they call me tenacious? What do I bring to the team? Am I stubborn, right? And does that match with how I see myself? I know for me, a lot of times it might be tough for me to come up with how I see myself right off the bat, but I can recognize when stuff doesn't feel right. So if somebody says, oh yeah, you're really peppy, I don't know, something like that, I would just be like, well, that's weird, but okay. You can start to see the differences between how others see you and how you want to see, and how does that feel? Like, is that how you want to be seen? And make changes one way or the other. And along with your friends, like when my therapist first asked me, how do you see yourself? Like, what do you think of yourself? How would you describe yourself? Okay, I play hockey, I drink beer, and I like cats. And she's like, okay, those are all very external things. It was very difficult to start to say well, how do you want your friends to see you? How would you like your friends to describe you? And that was a little easier to start to go, okay, like loyal. It's still tricky. But if you have friends that you trust enough to talk with about this and find out like, oh yeah, well, I'm stubborn for sure. But yeah, loyal, these things. And it's like, okay, yeah, that fits. That's what I would like to be seen as. These things help build your self-awareness, which then feeds into all the other areas. So moving on in my story, the idea for this talk came from a particularly tough time that I had earlier this year. I was spiraling deeper into depression, and I was about to give a talk in London that I hadn't finished. Like I was in London and like 2 days away from giving a talk. Along with that stress, I was also realizing that I was incredibly unhappy in my marriage, wasn't happy with my life in general. One sort of silver lining in this case was I had friends that were also in London at the time. And I knew all I had to do was kind of, okay, one thing at a time, get through this talk, like write the talk, give it, and then figure my life out. So these friends, because they'd offered before, I asked them for help. I reached out, and it was simple things because I knew what I needed. I just needed somebody to say to get your shit together and get it done. And so I said, hey, if you don't hear from me by noon, you text me to get my ass out of bed. If you don't hear from me by 5 that I've like completed 3 more slides, tell me to get my shit together and get my slides done. And she did it, because that's easy enough. If a friend asked me to like send a text at noon, I can set a reminder and send a text at noon. That's easy, right? Like it wasn't a huge ask. So I felt comfortable enough to do it, and she did it, and I got the talk done, thankfully. But on my way to give the talk, all I wanted to do was cry. And it may seem weird to say this because I'm standing up here talking about emotions and experience and all that, but I'm not a huge crier. It takes me a long time. And so that was like not good. It was a terrible feeling. So I'm walking there and I'm thinking, okay, how do I avoid ever being in this situation again? And like, what talk do I wish I was going to give? Because I was dreading to get up on stage and give this talk. And I realized at that point that I needed to talk about something I was passionate about. The talk I was about to give was the result of a very stressful project that I was on that I just felt like I needed to get something out of it. So I felt like sharing my experiences from that, lessons learned from that would be valuable. But I realized I just didn't want to relive it. Like, I just wanted to put that in the past and be done with it. So, okay, I'll get through it today, but I'm never giving that talk again, and I haven't. But I also was wondering, what talk did I wish I was going to hear at the time? And that's when I realized, like, it'd be really nice to hear about other people who struggle with this, who are in tech, who work in this culture that values burnout culture, and, we do jobs that are incredibly isolating. Even if you are on a big team, even if you see your team every day, which I do, it's an incredibly isolating job to be in your own head and to have headphones on, and you have to be alone to do a lot of the work that we do. So I wanted to hear that, one, I wasn't alone, and just how people were working with this. And that's why I'm here talking about it now. So in the months that followed that, I faced easily the most difficult times in my life. I got a divorce, I came out, I moved out on my own for the first time ever. The upheaval in my life inevitably impacted my work. And I was thankful enough that I was close enough with my coworkers or felt secure enough to not tell them everything, but for a select few, I said, hey, like, I'm going through some stuff right now. I am doing everything I can. I'm trying to cut down on all the extra stuff that I was involved in at work and just focus on project work since that was the priority. And I'm focusing on that. I'm doing everything I can to not let my project work slip, but I'm also not in a place to recognize it if it does. Like, I'm doing my best, but I know it might not be enough. So please come to me if it's not. And thankfully, I was able to get through that, kind of get my footing back. Then I broke my leg. So I was out a couple weeks. But finally now it's like, okay, things are back. And I realized I was very fortunate to have at least that trust in my team that I was able to talk to those people and kind of communicate my needs. And I know that can be kind of unique. So I want to talk about how your company can help, or how you can help build things at work that are sort of low cost, low barrier to entry. First, easy work-life balance, and that's something we don't have a lot of control over, but if you're in any sort of leadership role, it's important to lead by example. One thing that we have, our sort of project managers will, if people aren't taking vacation on the team, because we have like an open vacation policy, so if people don't take vacation, they will be told, like, please go plan a vacation. I don't care if you sit at home and like watch Netflix for a week, you need to take time off. And so that's something we encourage in our culture at work that I think is really valuable. And same for mental health days, which are just sort of this informal thing that we talk about, but just saying like, hey, we have those days where it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, nothing's getting done, you're not in a good headspace. You could sit there and be useless for the next 4 hours, come back in the next day and probably also be useless again because you haven't had time to just sort out whatever you need to sort out. Or you could take that time and say, like, look, I'm not going to be useful. I'm not going to get stuff done on the project whether I'm here or not today. So I'm going to take the afternoon, go home, do whatever I need to do, take some me time, and then show up the next morning actually ready to go if you need to be. Another thing is to have social events without alcohol or where they're not like the center point. And this is coming from, like, I love drinking, as I've said, but I also like cocktails, and we have a big cocktail culture at our work. But one way we've kind of brought this around is somebody just started up an informal cocktail club on Fridays. And it was great. We would socialize after work on Fridays, unwind, have drinks. It was a nice way to get to know people and talk to people that aren't on my team. But realizing that's excluding those who struggle with alcohol or just don't drink, for whatever reason. So we started offering, with every Friday with a cocktail, if you were going to make a cocktail, you would also make a mocktail. And so you could participate, you could still do all the social stuff and feel like you're included because you also get to have the drink. I mean, we were always welcoming to everybody else. They could always be there. But this extra step of just offering a mocktail showed them that they were being considered. And I know from my own standpoint of wanting to, like I said, just reduce drinking on my part, it's tough to think like, well, I'm not going to stay around work on a Friday night and drink and party all night or be around that because I don't want to be around that right now. And I can only imagine how that makes my coworkers who don't drink feel. So it's been an important movement for us in our company to start to be more conscious of that. Doesn't mean we eliminate alcohol for us because we have plenty of people who like drinking. It just means we're more aware and more inclusive in the events that we do. One easy thing that either you can do or advocate to be done is to make resources widely known. So whether it's insurance benefits with mental health, company trainings that are available, a return to work policy if you have to take time off for mental health, make sure those are easily accessible and that they're sort of widely known. Educate your coworkers about them or ask to be educated about them. I know onboarding, you can get a stack of paperwork like this. You're not going to read through it all, especially if you don't need those resources right now. But to know that they're there, that they exist, and where to find information about them if you do need them, that's a super low-cost thing for any company to do. Depending on your company size and how it works, you might be able to put that together. And it can be incredibly helpful. Lastly is building a community, which is easier said than done. But it's important to build a safe community And there's a couple ways that we've done this at work to help build like the safe environment. And a big part of it is leading by example and creating things that help foster this environment. So one of my coworkers just decided it would be great to have sort of a support group. So she created it. She's like, anybody wants to participate in this, we'll meet on Wednesdays at 6, and come join us. Wide open. And all it was very, you didn't need any experience. She kind of just put this together herself. All we did was go. We would share something that had been on our mind that week or the last 2 weeks, whatever it was, positive or negative. You share whatever it is for 5 minutes, and then you identify the emotion that you're feeling about it. And what that does is move that kind of problem in your head to a space where you can be more analytical about it. The goal of this group wasn't to solve problems, so we didn't need to be educated or really informed about what was going on. It was just us getting together to share and to kind of go through this practice together, which also meant I now had, in the group I was in, we had like 5-6 other people. I had 5-6 other people that I knew whatever they were struggling with or whatever they were celebrating, whatever they were anxious about. I knew that they were going through that at work, which meant I felt closer to them and felt safer sharing with them as well. And that was just something that a coworker of mine put together, literally zero cost to the company. Another thing is on Slack. We've got 2 things that I think are really great. One is called Donut Club, which is like a little Slack app. I think it's like donut.io. And what it does is pair people, 2 people, or if you have an odd number, 3 people. Every week or every other week, you can change how you want it to be. It pairs them randomly. So it automatically creates a Donut Club channel. You opt in by joining the channel. And every 2 weeks, the way we have it set up, you get paired with somebody, which is, at my company, we get very insular in our teams. And our teams shift and change, but aside from that, you really just see your team all the time. And so this was a great way for us to start to meet people outside our team. And the only obligation is to go have a coffee with that person, go get a donut, go have lunch if you want. It can be a half hour, it can be an hour. You can get beers after work if that's what you want. If they're remote, you can just do a hangout or Skype or Slack video and share a cup of coffee over that. It's taking a half hour out of your day to get to know this person, which serves as a nice break in your day, like a little mental break. Plus, you get to know people in your company, and it helps build that community. We also have a mental health channel, which I didn't start. It was there before I started at my company. And that, I will say, probably took a lot of bravery for somebody to start it and be the first person to post in it. But now that it's existing, it's incredibly empowering. So I've gotten a lot just being in there and reading things. But I also know, wow, a bunch of my coworkers are struggling with anxiety, or they're worried about this, or the news today is really getting everybody down. It's cool to not feel alone about those things. And then when I'm particularly struggling with something, I know I can go in there. I went in there and said, hey, I'm thinking about seeing a therapist. Do you have any recommendations? They gave me a bunch of recommendations. And that's also where I got the tips that, don't be afraid to leave your therapist if it doesn't feel like a fit. So it's sort of crowdsourcing this mental health information and kind of putting it in one place, but also making your company that safe space that has this, which is incredibly valuable. I know that doesn't work for everybody, and it doesn't work for every company, but if you're able to do that, it could be really, really helpful. So that is all I have today, but I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts that you may have. Definitely open to anything. Yeah.
I was wondering, what's the size of your company to support the mental health channel? Because obviously you would need some number of people in that channel.
Sure.
To make it useful and safe.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's an area where I know that like my company. Well, we have 150 people roughly. I don't know offhand how many people are in the mental health channel. Probably like 35. But one struggle I know, and I honestly don't have a solution for, but I want to acknowledge it, is just knowing that can't exist in all places without fear of repercussions. Like, and that is like a huge thing. That's why leading by example can be really helpful. So if you get some buy-in from people in power, from people in leadership, so that people feel safe enough to share without fear of repercussions, that can be really useful. But it is a conversation that we've even been having at work about just how do you make sure you're supportive of people, but also, you know, it is a business, that kind of thing. Yeah.
When you say fit for your therapist or a therapist, is it something that you're trusting your gut that you know that it's not a fit, or was there sort of some guidelines that you were given or can be given to realize that the therapist probably isn't for you?
I think part of it is I think the majority of it is like your gut feeling, right? I think we've all gotten advice that we feel like doesn't fit and isn't right. And I think talking to, and it can take some time. It's not gonna be, that was the other thing that I definitely learned. It's not like you're gonna meet on your first session and be like, I mean, maybe it's a terrible first date and you're like, whoa, this isn't going anywhere. But it could also take some time before you realize like this isn't helping me in the way I wanted it to help. But just knowing that you're going into sort of that transaction, that relationship with your therapist, that you're expected to get something out of it. And if you really feel like you're not, it's something you can talk to them about too. They are very open to it because they want you, like that's their job, is to help you and to help you get something out of it. So I've been told even by my therapist, like if this isn't working, like let's talk about it, because maybe it's something you can work through. Maybe it's like some misunderstanding, but it also, they know other people in their business, so they might know somebody. There's also like a lifestyle fit too, right? So me identifying as gay, like I'm not going to go to somebody who's going to try to like do gay conversion therapy, right? So there's like that, like, or somebody that really disagrees with my lifestyle, like obviously that's not going to fit. But yeah, I would say more than anything, it's that gut reaction. I'll just finish up by saying that I'll be hanging out there if you guys want to talk at all. I feel free to tweet me. I'll business cards too if you want to get in touch. I'm happy to help in any way I can. And I know, at least if I was sitting in your position, I'd never want to ask a question. So, but I'm totally open to questions out there. So thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.